world gone insane. An upside-down civilization cannot be real. A world of madness and terror.
It's the Dana Gould Hour.
Today's show is brought to you by Casper. Get $50 towards select mattresses by visiting casper.com/Dana and using the promo code Dana at checkout. Terms and conditions apply. And we apply them liberally. Hello all. This is our annual Messed Up Midsummer episode. I have been in the beautiful city of Atlanta, Georgia for the past month and a half, filming season 3 of Stand Against Evil, which promises to be our third season yet. No, it's the third season yet, and it's the best by far. Take my word for it. You'll find out in October. However, I didn't have time to do my laundry properly, much less get a podcast going. But I didn't want the month to go by with nothing to show for it. So what we're going to do this month is take some of my favorite middle pieces, those sort of journalistic chunks that I put in the middle of the podcast. Most especially ones from our early days, which we haven't rerun. And I wrote a new one that will lead off the show. And we'll do sort of a best of Storytime episode. We'll be back next month with a regular show. Two guys from Boston will be back. Our guests will be back. All of our regular features, as well as I'll be introducing my fall and winter stand-up schedule. More info on season 3 of Stan. Our new Patreon feature will be coming around. All that and more. You know, all the baloney we've come to slice. But in the meantime, enough of my talking. It's time for more of my talking.
Tune in, it's a gas. It's the Dana Gould Hour podcast.
The Dana Gould Hour. Listen all the time and give us all your money. That's all we ask.
Settle back now, content, comfortable, well-fed, and ready for some fine entertainment. Is everybody happy? Then let's go. It's showtime.
He was born in the wealthy Mayfair district of London in 1908. His grandfather was loaded. He founded the Scottish American Investment Trust and the merchant bank Robert Fleming and Company. His father, with the oh-so-brutish name of Valentine Fleming, was a member of Parliament and later a major in the British Army. He was killed by German artillery in World War I. Winston Churchill himself wrote his obituary for the London Times. Before his death, Fleming fathered 4 sons: Peter, Ian, Michael, and Richard. Ian Fleming attended Durnford Prep, which, according to Ian Fleming, sucked, and then Eton College. Fleming's freewheeling lifestyle brought him into conflict with the headmaster at Eton. Fleming was insolent, wore oil in his hair, owned a car, and slept around. In fact, he left Eton a year early to enroll at the Royal Military College, left there without gaining a commission, but he did get gonorrhea. Fleming bounced around for a few years trying to find himself, more often than not finding himself in some woman's pants. He studied in Geneva and Munich, got engaged, got unengaged, failed his exam in an attempt to work for the Foreign Office, got a job as an editor at Reuters, and spent 1933 in Moscow covering some of the Stalinist show trials. Finally, he gave up and went into the family business. He became a stockbroker and then a banker, failing at both. He succeeded only in having an affair with a married woman. Now, granted, Ian Fleming sounds like nothing more than a gold-plated fuck-up, but his luck took a miraculous turn in 1939, when Rear Admiral John Godfrey, Director of Naval Intelligence for the Royal Navy, hired him to be his personal assistant. As such, Fleming was commissioned into Her Majesty's Royal Naval Reserve. Fleming proved invaluable to Godfrey, as apparently Godfrey was as rough around the edges as Fleming was smooth, and he acted as the Admiral's liaison to many of the upper branches of the British government and its intelligence services. Fleming spent World War II devising espionage plans for the British government, many of them quite good and successful. One plan, devised by Fleming, came to be known as Operation Mincemeat, in which a corpse was dressed as a courier and his pockets stuffed with top-secret plans that were all completely bogus. The corpse was dropped into the water, where it and its bogus information fell into enemy hands. As a result, the Allied invasion of Sicily met with much less resistance than anticipated, as the bad information diverted Axis troops to the false landing point in Sardinia. Fleming also worked with FDR's Special Representative on Intelligence Cooperation, a man with a colorful nickname Wild Bill Donovan. Fleming traveled to the United States, where he assisted in writing the blueprint for the Office of Coordinated Information. This office would later change its name to the Office of Strategic Services, and then later it would change its name again to the Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA. Ian Fleming returned to England in charge of the No. 30 Assault Unit, a specialized commando group devised by Fleming himself, based on a similar unit that operated in Germany. The 30 Commando Unit operated just behind or sometimes just in front of advancing Allied troops, scouring abandoned German outposts for vital intelligence left behind by their rapid retreat. It was, as the British would say, a smashing success. In 1942, Fleming attended the Allied War Conference on the island of Jamaica. It rained the entire time, but he fell in love with the island and decided to live there after the war. In 1945, he built a house on the island that he would call Goldeneye. His neighbor was his friend Noel Coward. After World War II, Ian Fleming became the foreign manager of a newspaper group which owned, among others, the London Sunday Times. His contract gave him 3 months off every winter that he would spend in Jamaica. But Fleming had long wanted to write a spy novel based on his war exploits. And in February of 1952, he sat down and concocted a story that would become the novel Casino Royale. For its hero, he wanted a flat, somewhat unremarkable name. On his writing desk was a book entitled Birds of the West Indies by an American ornithologist named James Bond. He let a friend of his read the finished draft, and they advised him not to publish it, or at least publish it under another name. He didn't listen, and the first James Bond novel, Casino Royale, was published in 1953. It was a success, and for the next decade or so, Fleming would use his winter holiday in Jamaica to write another James Bond spy novel. An interesting side note is that the first 5 books, Casino Royale, Live and Let Die, Moonraker, Diamonds Are Forever, and From Russia with Love, all received very positive reviews. And then, suddenly, with the publication of the 6th, Dr. No, all the critics turned on him. One critic wrote of his having to suppress the urge to throw the book away 1/3 of the way through. He wrote that James Bond was comprised of 3 basic ingredients, quote, the sadism of a schoolboy bully, the mechanical, two-dimensional sexual longings of a frustrated adolescent, and the crude snob cravings of a suburban adult, unquote. Yeah. The Bond novels came out once a year, moving from the late 1950s into the early 1960s, and they always sold well. Then in 1961, in an article in Life magazine, President John F. Kennedy casually remarked that Fleming's From Russia with Love was one of his favorite novels, and sales exploded. The following year, the James Bond film Dr. No was released, starring a then-unknown Scottish truck driver turned actor named Sean Connery. Dr. No did okay, enough to warrant a sequel, 1963's From Russia with Love, and that did okay as well. It wasn't until the third Bond film, 1964's Goldfinger, that the films took off, becoming, along with the Beatles, who conquered the world that same year, one of the pop cultural tentpoles of the 1960s. Before we move on, there's an interesting aspect about Goldfinger. Now today, Goldfinger is considered the perfect James Bond film, with every aspect of the series firmly in place. Beautiful women, exotic locales, a larger-than-life villain, and a nasty henchman. People who always lament how ridiculous some of the later Bond films got frequently cite Goldfinger as an example of the earlier, better Bond films. The only problem with that is that Goldfinger is also completely ridiculous. In addition to his nasty Korean henchman Oddjob, played by a Korean-American weightlifter named Harold Sakata, supervillain Auric Goldfinger has at his disposal an all-female, sexy private air force led by a woman with a name that is so on the nose, it's not really a double entendre. It's really just... Well, is there such a thing as a single entendre?
Who are you?
My name is Pussy Galore.
I must be dreaming.
In the film, as well as in the book, Pussy Galore is a lesbian until, of course, she sleeps with James Bond, who cures her of it. You know, it was a different time. And as the Beatles ushered in the British invasion, giving us the Rolling Stones, the Kinks, the Who, the Dave Clark Five, etc., 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 the James Bond films gave us the spy craze. Movie houses were crammed full of martini-swilling, wisecracking junior James Bonds. Dean Martin had the Matt Helms series. James Coburn had the Derek Flint series. And if you're a fan of the Austin Powers films, and if you aren't, I don't understand why you're not, you have to watch the Matt Helm and the Derek Flint movies to see just how close these movies came to being their own parodies. Slightly less crazy, Michael Caine starred in the excellent Harry Palmer series, something of a working-class James Bond who wears glasses and drinks instant coffee. The Ipcress Files and Funeral in Berlin are among the best of this series. If you didn't want to go to the movies, you didn't have to. On television, there was The Man from U.N.C.L.E., partially developed by Ian Fleming. The name of Robert Vaughn's character, Napoleon Solo, has a distinctly Fleming flavor, as well as the name of the lead character in its spin-off, The Girl from U.N.C.L.E., in which Anne Francis played April Dancer. There was also Mission Impossible, which was produced by Desilu Studios, the television production company created by Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball. Its other big show was called Star Trek. Robert Vaughn and Bill Cosby starred in I Spy. This was long before people were aware that Bill Cosby did other things. I Spy was one of the first times an African-American actor co-starred in a major American television series. Mel Brooks and Buck Henry teamed up to parody the genre in the highly praised but still underrated Get Smart. But like Bond and the Beatles for that matter, the best spy series came from England. Roger Moore would eventually take over for Sean Connery as James Bond, but before that he was the Saint, super spy Simon Templar. The Saint had been played previously on radio by, among other people, Vincent Price.
Now suppose we discuss Roland P. Archibald and what brings him here this time.
Patrick McNee and Honor Blackman would play John Steed and Kathy Gale in The Avengers. Kathy Gale wore a lot of black cat suits and knew judo. Blackman would leave the series to play Pussy Galore in Goldfinger. She would be replaced in the series by Diana Rigg as Emma Peel. Oh, Lord. Diana Rigg, who eventually would go on to play James Bond's only wife, the ill-fated Tracy Bond, in the ill-fated On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And Patrick McNee would play Roger Moore's cohort in A View to a Kill, which bears a much closer resemblance to an all-male version of Murder, She Wrote than an installment of the Bond series. 1960, 2 years before the premiere of Dr. No, Patrick McGoohan played secret agent John Drake in Danger Man. John Drake was as different from James Bond as Michael Caine's Harry Palmer was, if in a different way. The series ran for 8 years, and by the end, Drake had grown fully disenchanted with his job, frequently butting heads with his superiors, and fully embracing the moral ambiguity involved in killing one's political enemies, an area James Bond never touched. In reality, McGoohan was a devout Catholic who reportedly was offered the role of James Bond, but turned it down because he felt there was too much emphasis on sex and violence. Side note about Patrick McGoohan, of all the people I met when I worked at The Simpsons, he is the one person I regret not getting a picture with. I only asked for a photo with one person, Elvis Costello, and Patrick McGoohan was the one I really regret not doing that. After the 8-year run of Danger Man, or as it was known in America, Secret Agent, McGowan was asked what he wanted to do next. What he created, was basically a sequel to Danger Man, picking up where it left off. What happens to a high-value secret agent after he resigns in disgust? The result was The Prisoner, a truly great television series. Worthy of its own middle section one day, it lasted for only one season but carried such a wallop that its impact can still be felt today. McGowan's character resigns in the opening credits, goes home, starts to pack, is gassed, and wakes up in a bizarre spa-like community called The Village. There he is referred to only as Number 6 and is continually pumped for information, for he knows not what. It's Orwellian, dystopian, profoundly a product of its time, and if you consider yourself a connoisseur of quality entertainment, mandatory viewing.
Yeah, baby! Yeah.
Pretty fascinating story if it ends there right, but there's no way it could. This is an entire world. Maybe you'd like to know more about Ian Fleming. Might I suggest Andrew Lissette's biography, Ian Fleming? Or John Pearson's The Life of Ian Fleming. You know the Bond movies, but have you seen In Like Flint? Our Man Flint? Or the Dean Martin, Matt Helm spy opus, The Wrecking Crew? Or by all means, get yourself a copy of The Prisoner. For this and so much more, head to danagould.com, click on our Amazon banner, and shop away. Did you know we have a new This Is the Sound of My Voice Dana Gould Hour t-shirt? Created by none other than Mark Tavares? We do. Check it out at danagould.com/store. All of these things are, as always, from me to you, with love, for money.
Who are you?
My name is Bond. James Bond.
Well, we didn't have James Bond, but we did have James Angleton. James Jesus Angleton, the CIA's Associate Deputy Director of Operations for Counterintelligence. In other words, he was the secret police inside the secret police. He began his career at Yale as a poet. He later joined the Army, worked alongside British intelligence in World War II, and eventually became one of the founding officers of the CIA. James Angleton, a man of great power and authority who, over time, went completely insane, while still holding on to his power and authority.
Now, watch very carefully. An ordinary tin of talcum powder. Inside, a tear gas cartridge.
No, I'm afraid it was nothing like that. James Angleton worked out of a dark little office, smoking and drinking and assembling what he believed was the Soviet Union's master plot, the strands of which he laboriously cataloged on thousands and thousands of note cards, which covered the walls of his office. It's hard to recall now, but in the aftermath of World War II, the communists were very openly determined to take over the world, and communist paranoia in the U.S. ran rampant.
In recognizing a communist, physical appearance counts for nothing. We take his word for it. But there are other communists who don't show their real faces, who work more silently.
The world was split down the middle, and American youth were taught in no uncertain terms why our system was better.
What is capitalism?
Let me tell you about something. It happened when Eleanor and I went down to get the things for the class weenie roast. We went to Mr. Brown's store. We needed weenies. Mr. Brown had weenies. It's as simple as that.
Is it, Timmy?
Well, Mr. Brown has property, all right, but that's not what he's interested in.
Go on.
When we agreed to buy everything from him, weenies, buns, marshmallows, and charcoal, he agreed to give us extra service and take a lot of the kids out to the picnic.
And do you know what we call people like that?
Meat packers?
No, Eleanor. Capitalists. And it was the protection of our capitalist way of life that drove James Angleton.
Meat packers?
Whatever. Angleton's true obsession was the mole. the Soviet double agent inside the CIA, that leaked information back to the KGB, ruining countless missions and leading to the murder of countless American agents. At night, Angleton would go out with his old friend Kim Philby, a British intelligence officer he met in World War II. Philby was now the attaché from the British Secret Service. And together, the two men would drink and plot and drink and plan and drink and drink. The search for the mole became Angleton's obsession, eventually, many think, driving him crazy. One quick example: Yuri Nisenko, a Soviet defector. But Angleton thought he was a fake defector, sent to feed us false information. So, just to be sure, Angleton had him thrown into solitary confinement in a secret CIA prison for 3.5 years. Just to be sure. And this was in 1964, mind you. Oh, by the way, Angleton was wrong about Yuri Nisenko. He was exactly who he said he was. But he was right about the mole, the Soviet double agent inside the CIA. And it was poetic justice for a former poet, his old buddy, Kim Philby. No! And Angleton walked around the rest of his life knowing that much of the information Philby passed on came from his own mouth.
You're joking.
I never joke about my work, 007.
Meat packers?
Ultraman, here he comes from the sky. Ultraman, watch our hero fly. In a superjet he comes from 1 billion miles away, from a distant planet land. Comes our hero, Ultraman.
Step right this way, folks. The show is about to begin. Right this way. Here we are. This creature. Is he the missing link? Is he man or beast? Some have pronounced him man.
What is this creature, you ask?
The geek.
Yes, the geek. The geek. Shameful blemish on the history of the American sideshow, or proud example of just how far a performer will go to please an audience. Isn't geekery, at long last, nothing if not the ultimate frontier of showmanship? And maybe even, yeah, I'll say it, pizzazz. Popular in the late 19th and the early 20th centuries, traveling sideshows exhibited a geek, often presented as a scientific discovery. See the wild man of Borneo. The scientific presentation would be a guy in a fright wig and a wild man costume running around in a pit. And for the big finale, he would bite the head off a live chicken. Something like that. One thing is for sure. The geek pit is pretty widely considered to be the bottom rung of the showbiz ladder.
How do you get a guy to be a geek? Is that the only one? I mean, is a guy born that way?
That's always a sore point in a carnival.
Why?
Geek is one of our biggest draws, but a lot of performers won't work a show that carries one.
And nowhere does the threat of geekdom lie heavier than in Nightmare Alley. Nightmare Alley, based on the novel by William Lindsay Gresham. This 1947 noirist of noirs tells the story of Stanton Carlyle, a two-bit grifter who hooks up with a traveling carnival, develops a bogus mind-reading act, and parlays that into a big money racket, hustling rubes as a faith healer of sorts, convincing local swells and fat cats that, through sleight of hand and simple carny tricks, he has a direct line to God himself. The higher he climbs, the more he thinks back to his start in the carnival, and the awful reminder of just how low a man can go. You would have to have never seen a film before in your life to not figure out where old Stanton Carlyle ends up before the credits roll. What is amazing about the film is it stars Tyrone Power, 20th Century Fox's biggest star at the time, which explains how it got made at all. But the studio hated it. Try to imagine Tom Hanks or Brad Pitt releasing a film today that concluded with them running bare-chested around a pit, shouting "Ooga Booga" and baring their teeth at a couple of doomed chickens. The book Nightmare Alley, upon which the film was based, starts with a bang as the character of Hoatley finally pulls young Stanton Carlyle aside and answers his pesky question.
How do you get a guy to be a geek?
Look, you pick up a guy and he ain't a geek. He's a drunk. A bottle-a-day booze fool, but you tell him, I got a little job for you. It's a temporary job. We gotta get a new geek. So until we do, you'll put on the geek outfit and fake it. You tell him you don't have to do nothing. You have a razor blade in your hand, and when you pick up the chicken, you give it a nick with the blade, and then you make like you're drinking the blood. Same with the rats. The marks in the crowd, they don't know no different. Well, he does this for a week, and you see to it that he gets his bottle regular and a place to sleep it off. This is what he thinks is heaven. So after a week, you say to him like this. You say all of a sudden, well, I gotta get me a real geek. You're through. Now he scares up. Because nothing scares a real rummy like the chance of a dry spell and getting the horrors. He says, what's the matter? Ain't I doing okay? So you say, like crap, you're doing okay. You can't draw no crowd faking a geek. Turn in your outfit. You're through. Then you walk away. Oh, he comes following you, begging for another chance, and you say, okay. But after tonight, out you go. But you give him his bottle. That night, you drag out the lecture and you lay it on thick. And all the while you're talking, he's thinking about sobering up and getting the crawling shakes. Well, you give him time to think it over. And then, while you're talking, you throw in the chicken. He'll geek.
It's the geek. He's got the heebie-jeebies again.
Yeah, Hoatley didn't give him his bottle today.
Why?
Says he'd been laying down on the job.
Here in the U.S. of America, there's no monarchy for the people to worship. Celebrities are our royalty, and worship them we do. From Brad and Angelina to Tom and Katie, the list is endless. But we must also take time to acknowledge those who came before. They may not be as famous, but they are nonetheless also in show business.
One such person? Stanley Barrett. Born in Pittsburgh in 1903 with a problem called phocomelia, which was probably the result of his mother taking the now banned drug thalidomide. The affliction left him with no arms, only hands that emerged from his shoulders like a seal's flippers. He was discovered one day selling newspapers on the corner and ended up in a sideshow. Thus was born CeeLo, the Seal Boy. Stanley loved performing as CeeLo, and his act was very simple. He'd go on stage and shave or shuffle cards. He appeared in every major sideshow of the day, including Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus, the Cole Brothers. Everybody loved CeeLo the Seal Boy, always had a smile on his face. He even befriended a chimpanzee. In fact, during one of the chimp's performances, 3 drunk guys began annoying CeeLo, and the chimp broke from his act to throw a chair at them. No one was going to mess with CeeLo while his chimp pal was around. CeeLo also loved to play cards and was a big gambler and was always known to have a backstage card game going. He loved what he was doing. Some people thought he was being exploited and wanted to save him from himself. But he said, save me from what? He had the right to perform, and he even fought for what was called at the time freaks' rights in the state of Florida. CeeLo retired in 1976, moved to Gibsonton, Florida. When he became ill, he returned to Pittsburgh, where, in a Catholic hospital, he passed away in 1980 at the age of 77. Stanley Barrett, CeeLo the Seal Boy, as told from American Sideshow by Mark Hartzman.
You've been enjoying Also in Show Business.
That
our refreshment stand, you'll find these pizza pies, freshly baked to your order. Make sure you get yours and enjoy it now.
Show starts in 4 minutes.
Now, if you're talking about crime, and you live in Los Angeles, like I do, then you have to talk about Jack Webb. Jack Webb personified the public's view of the LAPD for the better part of 30 years, first on radio and then on television, as the iconic straight-shooting Sergeant Joe Friday on Dragnet. Jack had a love affair with the city of Los Angeles, and he opened every episode with an ode to its fragile beauty.
This is the city, Los Angeles, California. It's a fine place to enjoy life. There are places reserved just for kids when they're young and feel young. Places they go when they're young and feel old, beginning the big search for something that often doesn't exist in the places they look for it.
Huh? Want to run that last sentence by me again?
Beginning the big search for something that often doesn't exist in the places they look for it.
All right. You say so.
Their search might end with a college degree. One thing sure, whatever they're looking for cannot be found inside a number 5 capsule. When they try, that's where I come in. I carry a badge.
Dragnet was the first police procedural show. Every episode of CSI or Homicide, it's basically a drawn-out episode of Dragnet. At least at first, when Dragnet was on in the 50s, it was a by-the-books cops and robbers show. And then it returned in 1967, after an 8-year hiatus, to take on a new enemy that was threatening the good citizens of the City of Angels. Hippies. Jack Webb did not like hippies. They were dirty, they had long hair, and they took weird drugs. Of course, this could only end one way.
He's dead.
Which is not to say that Jack was a stranger to drugs. Alcohol is a drug, and Jack Webb enjoyed a cocktail. He not only produced Dragnet in the 60s, he directed it, and he didn't fool around. Sergeant Friday wore the same outfit in every episode because he did not want to mess with wardrobe. He had a small group of actors that he felt comfortable with, and he used them repeatedly, and he had no problem using the same actor in a different role from one week to the next. Now, the rumor is, and this is where it gets good, all of the important coverage of a scene, all the close-ups and the two shots, were all shot in the morning. They all had to be done before lunch, because sometimes, after lunch, Jack was not so productive. Sometimes Jack would have too many martinis. In fact, the crew would often hide the clock to make sure they got what they needed for the day before lunch, and sometimes 1 o'clock wouldn't roll around until 3:30. The afternoons after lunch were dedicated to masters, where things like Sergeant Friday walks into a room in a straight line when possible. Jack Webb went on to make a fortune as the producer of shows like Adam 12 and Emergency, but he never lost his hard-ass, by-the-book image. I actually had a friend who worked for him late in his career, and he claims that for all the bluster, Jack Webb was a pretty decent guy, which is always nice to hear. And not too surprising, to be completely honest. Jack Webb, LA's finest. Here is an LA crime story that strains credulity, as they say, but it is all true. Did you know the bizarre connection between the Beach Boys and Charles Manson? In 1968, Beach Boys drummer Dennis Wilson was driving through Malibu when he noticed 2 female hitchhikers. He picked them up and, being Beach Boys drummer Dennis Wilson, brought them home. Later, they introduced him to their friend, a very charismatic, 5-foot, 4-inch hippie dude named Charles, as in Manson. Now, this is 1968, and Charles Manson hadn't done anything yet, so he was just, a short hippie dude named Charles Manson. And he had a lot of chicks with him, so he and his so-called family, things starting to sound familiar now, pretty much moved in with Dennis Wilson. And for a while, everything was great. Charlie fancied himself an amateur songwriter. Dennis liked enough of his work to bring it to the Beach Boys. They famously recorded one of his tracks. And there was even talk of getting Charlie a recording contract with the band's record label, Brother Records. But by that time, Charlie had started getting, well, turbo weird. At one point, Charlie was told that he and the family had to move out of Dennis's house as they had basically overrun the place. Charlie didn't appreciate it, so he stopped by one day and gave Dennis's housekeeper a gift to pass on to Dennis. A bullet. That queered the deal. So now, 3 things happen. The job of telling Charlie he's not going to get a record contract with Brother Records falls to Beach Boys pal and record producer Terry Melcher. Charlie and his family move out of L.A. and relocate to the Simi Valley, where they stay at the Span Ranch, which in its heyday was a movie location used for westerns. And Terry Melcher and his then-girlfriend, actress Candice Bergen, move out of their house. That house is then rented out to another couple, movie director Roman Polanski and his wife, Sharon Tate.
Deeds Brothers Dairy, the home of the finest in dairy products. Milk is health. Deeds dairy name on a bottle or carton is your guarantee of taste satisfaction and quality. Call Deeds Brothers Dairy, featuring worry-free home service, delivered to your door. That's Deeds Brothers Dairy.
Murder! 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 Murder!
Murder. Murder. Most foul. Well, I wouldn't say that. To me, murder most foul has to be something special. You know, like being pulled apart by a gorilla in the ocean while surfing. Anyway, there are few cases that are more fascinating than that of Michael Peterson. Duke University graduate, Vietnam veteran, retired Marine Corps captain. He returned to North Carolina, where he wrote 3 successful books and wrote a column for the Durham Herald-Sun, where he was, among other things, highly critical of the Durham County District Attorney, a man named James Hardin, Jr. This was something that Michael most probably came to regret, as, in 2002, James Hardin Jr. prosecuted Michael Peterson for the death of his wife. In December of 2001, Michael called 911 and reported that his wife, Kathleen, was unconscious and appeared to have fallen down a flight of stairs. The autopsy showed she had been drinking and taken a Valium, and that she had died of blood loss as a result of the lacerations at the top and back of her head. It seemed like a tragic accident.
Murder!
Well, that's what James Hardin Jr. thought. And Michael was put on trial.
Murder!
Yes, indeed. And so he was tried. But he was also put on trial for being bisexual, which the DA alleged, and about lying about his military service, and so on and so on and so on.
Murder!
Yeah. Anyway, the prosecution claimed a missing fireplace poker was the murder weapon, that he beat her on the head and that she had fallen down the stairs, even though the wounds were completely inconsistent with an attack of that sort, and the poker was eventually found to have no DNA on it. But still, the prosecution persisted. Peterson, the entire time, remained eerily calm.
Calm? Calm? Do murder and calm go together? Calm and murder?
No, they don't. But Peterson kept his cool, asserting that the DA was waging a personal vendetta based on his columns exposing the office's crooked and incompetent ways. And Peterson was right. For example, one of the prosecution team's key witnesses was the so-called Blood Spatter Team, a group of self-proclaimed experts that supposedly proved that Kathleen's blood spatter pattern on the wall was consistent with a fireplace poker attack to the head. This, despite the fact that it obviously was not consistent with a fireplace poker attack to the head. And so it turned out, the Blood Spatter Team was a gaggle of frauds, incompetent frauds. And one of the key members of the DA's prosecution team, Michael Nifong, later became the Raleigh-Durham District Attorney. And when he was, he prosecuted, quite famously, the Duke lacrosse team for allegedly raping a stripper at a party. This after he was presented with evidence that proved they were innocent, evidence he then suppressed. Knowing they were innocent, he tried to convict them anyway. Fortunately, he was caught and convicted and disbarred. But Michael Peterson was right, and one would think he was getting obviously railroaded. But then one doesn't know about Elizabeth Ratliff. Elizabeth Ratliff was a close friend of Michael's from the early 80s, when he was living in Germany, working for the State Department. Michael and Elizabeth were very good friends. One night, Michael drove Elizabeth home after a dinner party, said goodnight, and the next morning Elizabeth was found dead, lying at the foot of her staircase. Sound familiar? Now, Michael was never charged with the crime. It was determined that Elizabeth Ratliff died of a brain hemorrhage. But the coincidence was creepy, to say the least. And the Raleigh-Durham DA managed to introduce the case at the trial, planting in the jurors the idea that Michael Peterson was a serial staircase killer. This is a legal device known as goo. Despite the fact that Elizabeth Ratliff's children went to live with Michael, came to call him dad, and supported him in the face of the DA's insinuations, despite the fact that they never found a murder weapon, and that the linchpin of the prosecution's case, the blood spatter, was discredited as fraud. Michael Peterson was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Guilty. 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 Guilty.
Great story if it ends there, right? And you can see the story in the brilliant documentary The Staircase, which follows Michael and his lawyers from accusation through the trial. Now, how do you get a copy of The Staircase? It's quite simple, really. Just go to danagould.com, click on our Amazon link, and shop away. You get what you want at no extra charge, and we get a few shekels to keep the lights running. But back to my original point. This story is not over. Michael Peterson appealed the verdict and lost. But based on the fact that the blood spatter team was revealed to be a bunch of clowns, the prosecution team to be as crooked as the winner of a Crooked Thing contest, Michael Peterson was released from prison and is now awaiting a new trial. But the question persists. If Michael Peterson didn't do it, then who did? Who? And therein lies your hint. The leading suspect in the murder of Kathleen Peterson is an owl. No, it's true. Attorney T. Lawrence Pollard was going over the evidence list and came across two simple words: a feather. A microscopic owl feather and a sliver of wooden tree limb were found in a clump of Kathleen's hair that had been pulled out by the roots and were found clutched in her left hand. A later examination found two more feathers. It was also concluded that the gashes on Kathleen's head, while not conducive with those of a fireplace poker, were conducive with the wounds caused by the talons of an owl. That would also fit perfectly with the real blood spatter. That would imply she was attacked by an owl, ran into the house, ran up the stairs, fell, hit her head, and fell back down. And so, the Michael Peterson saga continues. The question: how will they ever get that owl up on the stand? Well, that is obviously easy. You tell him he gets to swear in on a Bible made of mice.
We are about to witness the takeoff of the first manned rocket to outer space. We pick up the count. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0!
We're off to visit the planets. There are treats galore in the stars. Venus is loaded with candy, and ice cream is found upon Mars. The soda pop's fizzing on Saturn. When you're thirsty, it sure hits the spot. And Jupiter's really jumping with popcorn that's buttered and hot.
You spend 1/3 of your life sleeping, so you should be comfortable. The original Casper mattress combines multiple supportive memory foams for a quality sleep surface with the right amount of both sink and bounce. Casper products are cleverly designed to mimic human curves, providing supportive comfort for all kinds of bodies. Its breathable design helps you sleep cool and regulate your body temperature throughout the night. They're all designed, developed, and assembled in the U.S. and delivered right to your door in a small, how-do-they-do-that size box. You can be sure of your purchase with Casper's 100-night, risk-free, sleep-on-it trial. Get $50 towards select mattresses by visiting Casper.com, that's CASPER.com/Dana, and using the promo code Dana at checkout. Terms and conditions apply. That's $50 towards select mattresses by visiting Casper.com/Dana and using the promo code Dana at checkout. Terms and conditions apply.
Sure, you get yours and enjoy it now.
On April 15th, 1979, James Dallas Egbert III, then aged 16, disappeared from his dormitory room at Michigan State. A police search began, but proved fruitless. Eventually, Egbert's parents hired a private detective, a man named William Deere, to locate their son. When it was discovered that Egbert had been in the university's utility tunnels, also called the steam tunnels, and it was later revealed that Egbert III played Dungeons and Dragons with some friends from college, Deere theorized that perhaps he might have gone down into the tunnels to play a live-action version of the game. It was a theory, nothing more, but it was taken as fact by the local news media, who went on to further misrepresent Deere's theory by reporting that the game itself had warped Egbert's mind and led him down there in the first place. What really happened was that James Dallas Egbert III was a child prodigy who, by the age of 16, was already at Michigan State studying computer science. Not surprisingly, for someone on such an accelerated path, there were related personal issues. Poor James also suffered from depression, loneliness, homosexual guilt, and drug addiction. When he disappeared from his room, he went down into the university's steam tunnels with the intention of killing himself. He tried, taking an overdose of Quaaludes, but he woke up the next day and subsequently went into hiding. He ended up in New Orleans, where he made a second suicide attempt. That one also failed. And before long, he contacted William Deere, the private investigator his parents had hired, and turned himself over to him. Egbert found himself in the care of his uncle, a doctor, but sadly, a third suicide attempt would prove successful. Enter Rona Jaffe, who pumped out a quickie novel called Mazes and Monsters based on the news reports, not the facts. And it was this combination that started the Dungeons and Dragons will lead to satanic death cult membership frenzy of the early Reagan era. Film rights for Rona Jaffe's book were scooped up, and the next thing you know, Mazes and Monsters found life as a made-for-TV movie way back in 1982, and did indeed star a 26-year-old Tom Hanks in his first leading role. The film tells a thinly fictionalized account of the misinterpreted and false version of the James Dallas Egbert case, and for all of the viewers of the movie who are unfamiliar with it, no worry. A local news reporter shows up right at the start of the film to supply all the necessary information. He delivers it right into camera for what must be the most background-heavy news program in history.
This is Bud Hayden, live from Pequod Campus, where I'll be reporting on the apparent disappearance of a Grant University student, the victim of a seemingly innocent game, Mazes and Monsters. Now, Mazes and Monsters is a fantasy role-playing game in which the players create an imaginary character. These characters are then plunged into a fantasy world of invented terrors. The point of the game is to amass a fortune without being killed. It's kind of a psychodrama, you might say, where these people deal with problems in their lives by acting them out. But in this case, there might be a loss of distinction between reality and fantasy, and possibly the loss of life in the process. I'll be back in 3 minutes with another live report.
3 minutes? What the hell's going to happen in 3 minutes? You already gave away the plot of the movie. Young Forrest Gump plays Robbie, and yep, you betcha, his parents suck. We meet them on their way to dropping old Robbie off at college.
I should have driven Robbie up myself.
Oh, you should. Well, may I remind you, whether you like it or not, we are still a family.
I hate it when you drink.
I drink to get through the day. I was a talented, well-educated woman.
Cat, please, let's not start that again. It's getting very thin.
Well, I could have been someone.
Oh, my God. It almost makes you wonder if Robbie is going to end up being one of those kids the reporter was referring to. Wait a minute. Well, naturally, Robbie gets involved in the games, and before he knows it, the line between fantasy and reality is being blurred. Specifically in his dreams, where he is confronted by a mazes and monsters type wizard known as the Great Hall.
Who are you?
I am the Great Hall. Once you gloried in killing, now you are of a higher level. To attain the highest level, you must be holy in all your life. You must be pious, humble, celibate.
Well, so much for that game. But old Robbie buys it hook, line, and sinker. His pursuit of whatever it is that he wants leads him to what the Great Hall calls the Two Towers, or what we called the top of the World Trade Center back when that was a thing. He almost jumps, but gets talked out of it, and the last we see Robbie, he is off living at his parents' house, just as nutty as a goddamn fruitcake. Now, if you're looking for a movie about two people embarking on a relationship that falls prey to that other fantasy, well, you have to see 2002's Secretary, starring James Spader and Maggie Gyllenhaal. Written and directed by Steven Shainberg, not Spielberg, Secretary tells the story of Lee Holloway, a painfully shy and somewhat inept young woman who becomes the secretary to one E. Edward Grey, which James Spader plays to Spader-esque heights. Lee's innate submissiveness triggers Grey's sadomasochism, and the dance begins. Over the course of the story, the more Grey dominates Lee, the more she blossoms as a person. Of course, the more she blossoms as a person, the more she needs Grey to dominate her, and one begins to wonder who's really in charge of whom. Before long, their relationship has become untenable and must move forward or collapse.
I love you.
We can't do this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Why not?
Put both your hands on the desk, palms down.
I want to make love.
Keep both your feet on the floor until I come back.
Well, that's what happens when the right submissive meets the right dominant. But what happens when the wrong dominant meets the wrong other dominant? Well, there you end up on ground that's a lot more comfortable for yours truly to discuss at length. (1963's) King Kong vs. Godzilla. Now, I can hear you already saying there's no interesting story behind the making of King Kong vs. Godzilla. Well, if you are saying that, I can hear you. And you are mistaken. Now, King Kong, as you know, is an American film classic. Made in 1933, it is one of the AFI's top 100 films of all time, and a masterpiece of stop-motion animation. King Kong vs. Godzilla, made 30 years later, is a quickie ripoff with two guys in rubber suits wrestling in a miniature city. There's no way these two can be related.
Why not?
Get back in your own movie. Actually, they are related. The film's origin lies in the brain of Willis O'Brien, a certified genius who pioneered the art of stop-motion animation, and the man who brought the original Kong to life on screen. Somewhere around 1960, some 27 years after the release of the original King Kong, Willis O'Brien had a thought. His thought was, I like money. And so he set about devising another King Kong movie. As the original Godzilla had been released 3 years previous, O'Brien came up with a clever idea. What if King Kong met Frankenstein? That's right. The original idea had nothing to do whatsoever with Godzilla. He wanted to see King Kong fight a giant version of Frankenstein in San Francisco. Now, I can see King Kong fighting Godzilla, but a giant Frankenstein, that can't be real. When it was learned that he could not obtain the rights to the Frankenstein monster, the title was changed to King Kong vs. the Ginkgo, Ginko. I do not know why.
Why not?
Fair point. Enter a producer named John Beck, and a title change to King Kong vs. Prometheus, which makes sense because the subtitle of Mary Shelley's original novel Frankenstein was The Modern Prometheus. But you knew that, didn't you, ladies?
I want to make love.
Of course you do. But wait, I know even more about old monster movies.
I want to make love.
Anyway, here's a great little Hollywood story. Willis O'Brien is introduced to John Beck, who promises to get a buyer for the movie based on Willis O'Brien's idea. So after he shops the script around, he finally gets some interest from the Japanese studio Toho, which made Godzilla. But, and here's where it becomes oh so Hollywood, he never told Willis O'Brien that part. Toho starts to negotiate with Beck, but Beck keeps it a secret because he's done some research and has found out that O'Brien doesn't own the rights to King Kong. So he goes behind his back and sells O'Brien's idea, which he did not have the rights for, which John Beck certainly doesn't have the rights for, to Toho Studios.
Why not?
Not so fast.
I want to make love.
Enter Marion C. Cooper, who produced the original King Kong, who sues Beck, saying you can't sell a King Kong movie without having the rights to King Kong. I own the rights, and you stole them from me. And Beck says, no, I didn't steal them from you. I stole them from Willis O'Brien. But Cooper says Willis O'Brien doesn't own them. I do. Enter RKO Studios, who released the original King Kong. And they say, Marion C. Cooper, you don't own the rights either. We do. So now everybody's suing each other. Who stays on in the project? Of course, John Beck. The one guy who had absolutely no reason to ever assumed he owned a goddamn thing.
Why not?
Exactly. King Kong vs. Godzilla is a real gem. It delivers everything that its title promises, and there are a lot worse ways a 10-year-old kid can kill a rainy Saturday. Like Mazes and Monsters, the film comes with a convenient news report that explains the story to you as it goes.
Yutaka Omura from Tokyo, reporting that the situation is grim. Godzilla has crossed the first line of defense. A blockade of high-tension wires is being hastily linked around Tokyo.
Okay. I guess that is for all of us out there who aren't actually watching this movie, even though we're watching the movie. I mean, we've just seen everything you just told us. This is used a lot in old science fiction movies, especially things like Them and the Praying Mantis. The local news reporter always has way too much information and tells it to everyone as if they care. The giant spider is now headed towards Prescott, Arizona, home of famed archaeologist Willard Baines, who's fighting with his daughter because she's taken up with a renegade cop, Derek Berkman. Fist. Lastly, King Kong vs. Godzilla has one of my favorite little nuggets in all of film history, where they need to amp up the tension a little bit, so just to goose it, they start making stuff up. You know, stuff from physics.
It was observed in his attack on the train at Hokkaido that he moved away from the high-tension wires whenever possible. Yet, Dr. Johnson, you have stated that King Kong grows stronger from electricity.
Yes, Kong draws strength from electric voltage.
Okay, got that, kids? Unlike reptiles, when mammals are electrocuted, they get stronger. So, try to remember that.
Sizzling hot dogs, bursting with juicy goodness.
Anton LaVey may be one of the world's most celebrated anti-Christian Satanists, but he ain't got nothing on Aleister Crowley. Born Edward Alexander Crowley in England in 1875, Ed would grow up to become one of Western civilization's leading devotees of the occult. As a young man, he became a member of a secret society known as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. A real thing. It's an offshoot of the Freemasons, but spookier. Ed Crowley would soon change his name to Aleister Crowley. He was also referred to as the Great Beast 666, a name he gave himself. He was a vocal critic of the moral and religious values of his time, but he took it a little farther than most people. Crowley had a vision that he had been visited by the great spiritual beings known as the Secret Chiefs, and that the Secret Chiefs had admitted him into the Third Order of the Golden Dawn. Now, from there, Crowley set about creating his own magical society, which would be based on his philosophy of Thelema. This would become known as the OTO, or the Ordo Templi Orientis. Again, not unlike his future soul brother Anton LaVey, the guiding principle of Thelema would be, do what you want to do. But Crowley worked in a lot more sex, drugs, robes, crazy hats, animal masks, astrology. He really ran with it. Crowley frequently espoused views about drugs and sex, especially sex, that were radical for his time, this being turn-of-the-century England, picking up the nickname the wickedest man in the world. He published a book of poetry called White Stains that covered just about every taboo sexual activity one could think of. He built sexual acts into the rituals of Thelemic religious ceremonies. You know what they say, do what you love. But I know what you're asking. What does this have to do with the movie Mission Impossible 4 Ghost Protocol? Well, I'll tell you. But to do that, we have to travel all the way across the Atlantic to Southern California in the wee early days of the Cold War, the late 1940s, just after World War II, that magical, mystical time when American society as we know it was being forcibly hammered into shape. And one of the men doing that hammering, or trying to anyway, was Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons was one of America's leading experts in the world of rocket science. In fact, he was one of the founders of JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratories, and as such, one of the key figures in American missile defense. He was a leader in the field of solid fuel research and was one of the principal designers of the Minuteman rocket and the Polaris missile. As you can imagine, he was well paid, well taken care of, and well scrutinized by the FBI. For Jack Parsons was also an extremely devoted member of Aleister Crowley's Ordo Templi Orientis. In 1942, Parsons was chosen by Crowley himself to lead the OTO's Southern California chapter. Now, Parsons was a big-time science fiction fan, and this brought him into contact with an up-and-coming science fiction writer of the day named L. Ron Hubbard. Parsons and Hubbard hit it off. Soon Hubbard moved into Parsons' Pasadena mansion, and from there he moved right in on Parsons' girlfriend. In a letter to Crowley, then at the end of his life, Parsons wrote, "Betty and I are still friendly, but she has transferred her sexual attention to Ron." Oh, Ron. Crowley thought Parsons was a gullible fool who was being taken to the cleaners by a con artist. Crowley was weird, but no dummy. And this is an opinion of L. Ron Hubbard that was shared by many of Hubbard's friends at the time. In a letter to writer Isaac Asimov, Hubbard's friend L. Sprague de Camp wrote, "You know, Robert Heinlein thinks that Ron went to pieces morally as a result of the war. I think this is fertilizer. He was always that way. But when he wanted to conciliate or get something from somebody, he could put on a good charm act." Well, that aside, Parsons, Hubbard, and the two-timing Betty set about to enact one of the great rituals of the OTO, the Babylon Working, a sex magic ritual whereupon the men would summon the incarnation of Babylon, the mother of abominations. This they did over several nights in February of 1946. Parsons used his magic wand to whip up an energy vortex into which Babylon would be summoned. What this translates to, according to Richard Metzger in his book of Lies, the Disinformation Guide to Magic and the Occult, a notably unobjective discourse on the subject. Quote, "Parsons jerked off in the name of spiritual advancement while Hubbard scanned the astral plane for signs and visions." Well, Parsons must have been happy because the three of them went on to form a business partnership, mostly funded by Parsons, called Allied Enterprises. Now, the plan was for Hubbard and Betty, Parsons' ex-girlfriend, to travel to Florida to buy luxury yachts and then sail them back to California where they would be sold for a profit. So Hubbard and Betty went to Florida, bought a yacht, and then decided, fuck Jack, let's take a world cruise instead. When word of this got back to Parsons, he was decidedly unhappy. Weather, more than anything else, prevented the seafaring duo from leaving on their planned trip. and the resulting fallout left Parsons shattered and profoundly less wealthy. I'm not sure where Betty ended up, but L. Ron Hubbard, as you know, went on to start a scrappy little religion called Scientology. That is how the story goes in the several published accounts of Jack Parsons' life. There is a differing version. Now, this is taken from early Scientology literature and is reprinted in John A. Tack's A Piece of Blue Sky, Scientology, Dianetics, and L. Ron Hubbard Exposed. L. Ron Hubbard is referred to in the third person in this piece, but it was written by Hubbard himself. Quote, Hubbard broke up black magic in America. L. Ron Hubbard was still an officer of the U.S. Navy because he was well known as a writer and a philosopher and had friends amongst the physicists. He was sent in to handle the situation. He went to live at the house and investigated the black magic rites and the general situation, and found them very bad. Hubbard's mission was successful far beyond anyone's expectations. The house was torn down. Hubbard rescued a girl they were using. The black magic group was dispersed and destroyed, and has never recovered. End quote. Hooray! He's like some kind of super spy, just like his pal Tom Cruise, and what I feel confident in saying is the greatest movie of all time with the words Ghost Protocol in the title. Mission Impossible 4. Ghost Protocol. See how we come full circle on this stuff? It's spooky.
Popcorn, rich with hot melted butter. Steaming hot coffee. Your favorite cigarettes.
Love and marriage. Love and marriage. They go together like a horse and carriage. What a great analogy. For what does a horse love to do more than pull a carriage? Why roam free around a meadow when you can be harnessed to a heavy cart filled with people and be whipped across your back as you drag them somewhere? There are a select few animals that practice monogamy: eagles, wolves, and, you guessed it, prairie voles. But human beings are the only creatures on earth who came up with the idea of the social contract of marriage. We're also the only creatures on earth who came up with the idea of putting 40 clowns into one small car. Just saying. Marriage is a human tradition that extends all the way back to pre-biblical times, but for people who get all hopped up on the idea of a traditional marriage, they should do a little research before they slap on that bumper sticker. Initially, the traditional purposes of marriage were political, or military, or social. It was commonplace among the royalty and nobility around the world. In ancient Egypt, marriages were arranged so as to keep the royal bloodlines pure. This, over time, led to an ever-shrinking gene pool, which resulted in a lot of inbreeding, which naturally came with a lot of inbreeding-related problems, like hemophilia and a deep love of country music. In fact, in Europe, where this practice of growing one's own tomatoes, so to speak, was very widespread, hemophilia was known as the royal disease. Look at the royal family of England now. They don't look inbred. The Romans also had a charming traditional marriage practice. Daughters were a useful form of currency, which was used to help form strategic alliances and strengthen the military positions of a particular family. The royal princesses of Europe were used in much the same way well into the 19th century. Young girls were promised to the sons of neighboring countries as a way of forming international partnerships, often when the girls were just babies. In some instances, marriages actually took place when the princesses were very young girls, who then remained home with their parents until they were old enough to be shipped off to some old dude they'd never met before. Marie Antoinette was the subject of one such arranged marriage, or shall I say, traditional marriage, becoming the Queen of France. Unfortunately, this occurred right at the time when the French people were very eager to cut off the head of the Queen of France, which they did. Arranged marriages of a form are still practiced even today, especially in India, Pakistan, and Japan. So maybe, just maybe, marriage is not a preformed, concrete concept that must be slavishly adhered to, but a more fluid concept, one that is capable of evolving and adopting with ever-changing needs of a constantly evolving society. And marriage is undeniably a great thing. Don't fuck yours up. Which brings me to a little movie that celebrates this institution without a hint or irony of sarcasm. A film that shows how this ancient ritual helps elevate human beings above the simple beasts of the forest. Even if you could claim, as the lead character in this film is forced to admit, I married a monster from outer space. This movie, made in 1958, begins with a very Mad Men-y group of dudes pounding them back at their local watering hole, all bemoaning their betrothed lot in life.
Hey, waiter. Mr. Farrell's getting married in the morning. Give him a drink. Freedom on the rocks.
I am married. Give me another drink. Every one of us was married, is married, or is about to get married. So give us all another drink.
Gee, I wonder what the theme of this movie is. I bet it has something to do with marriage. You see, Tom is getting married to Gloria. But on the night before their wedding, as often happens, Tom meets and is kidnapped by creatures from outer space and replaced with an alien replica. Now, if you're an alien replica and you're scheduled to get married tomorrow, as often happens, what do? Well, obviously, you meet your fiancé for drinks, even if the small talk is somewhat strained.
I'm running out of small talk.
Why do we have to talk?
Well, the least you can do is ply me with liquor. To our marriage, darling.
To our marriage.
Which is just the be-all and end-all as far as these modern gals are concerned.
Don't marry him. I mean, don't marry him today. Postpone it for a while.
After all the years it took me to land him?
Not that the aliens are particularly groovy.
Did you love your women before they died?
Love? No, we came together for beating purposes only.
Okay, Mr. Cruz. And then, the obvious result of any human-alien interaction.
Are you telling me you're learning how to love?
I'm telling you I'm learning what love is.
Ah, love.
Hungry? How about a hearty Castleberry's pit-cooked barbecue sandwich? Castleberry's has the smoky, savory goodness you get only with the finest lean chunks of meat, slow-cooked over a real barbecue pit to seal in the succulent juices, and braised with a zesty barbecue sauce. No wonder Castleberry's pit-cooked barbecue sandwiches have such a luscious flavor. Great with soft drinks, French fries, and other fine snacks. Visit our snack bar now and ask for Castleberry's pit-cooked barbecue sandwiches.
Let's talk about the year 1981. An odd year, and not just numerically. 1981 was a very interesting year. It got off to a weird start. The President of the United States got shot. On March 30th, 1981, newly sworn-in President Ronald Reagan, who had yet to really die and become a saint, was just a regular fella walking around, and he caught a bullet in the gut. But here's the weird part. It didn't kill him. And half the country, who at that time trusted Ronald Reagan about as far as they could throw him, and thought the only thing he had going for him was that his name wasn't Jimmy Carter, thought, well, that's weird. I can't say I'm still nuts about him, but at least he's not dead. The pop cultural era that people think of as the 80s had not started yet. 1981 was still very much mired in the late 70s. The birth of the pop cultural period known as the 80s, or as Elvis Costello once called it, that charmless time. I would put that in the summer of 1983, in my own humble opinion, with the explosion of MTV and the flooding of the cultural end zone that was Michael Jackson's Thriller album. The biggest selling album of 1981 was Journey's Escape. A nice little factoid for those people who think the masses are always right. The Rolling Stones' Tattoo You came out in 1981, as well as Foreigner 4. Jay Giles' Freeze Frame, which is worth a listen if you've never heard it. The Clash's Sandinista, The Police's Ghost in the Machine, The Replacement's Sorry Ma Forgot to Take Out the Trash, Elvis Costello's Trust. And I'm sure I'm leaving out your favorite, but let's end this list with a sign of things to come. Blondie's hit Rapture, which featured the first rap ever in a top 40 hit. Now, if you're like me and you mark time by what movies were in the theaters, 1981 was a glorious year. It was the year of Raiders of the Lost Ark, as well as An American Werewolf in London, Stripes, The Road Warrior, Escape from New York, the first Evil Dead, and a bunch of big movies like On Golden Pond that I don't care about. But if you were in Boston, Massachusetts, in 1981, it was the year of the Phantom Clown Scare. Starting in the spring of 1981, the Boston Police Department began getting persistent reports of men in clown suits harassing young children. One report told of a clown driving a black van around a recreational park. And when he emerged from the van, it was revealed, no pun intended, that he was naked from the waist down. So bad was this epidemic that the Boston Public School District had to send a memo to all schools warning, "It has been brought to the attention of the police department and the district office that adults dressed as clowns have been bothering children to and from school. Please advise all students that they must stay away from strangers, especially strangers dressed as clowns." Within a month, the child-harassing clown scare had spread to a dozen surrounding cities, to the point that, and I love this, I quote, "regular clowns on their way to birthday parties and delivering clownograms were regularly stopped by the police." But no clown-disguised child harassers were found, and the police grew frustrated. Further investigation found no credible adult witnesses, and police began to doubt the veracity of the black van driving pantsless clown epidemic. Now, were these phantom black van driving pantsless clowns? Or were they real black van driving pantsless clowns on the move? The sightings moved south to Providence, Rhode Island, and then 1,000 miles west to Kansas City, Missouri, where in May, police crisscrossed the city, chasing a knife-wielding clown in a yellow van that had been reported harassing 6 different elementary schools. 6! Children in Kansas City were terrified. Many were kept home from school. Now, was this mass hysteria? Or was something really going on? Were knife-wielding, van-driving, child-harassing clowns real? They were soon reported in Omaha, then Denver. Then a school in Pennsylvania reported a man in a pink and white rabbit costume harassing children near a schoolyard. That rabbit was later reported, and here's where it gets great, walking around a cemetery. Yes! People, if you have a free day, put on a rabbit costume and stroll through the cemetery. It's a victimless crime, and if anyone sees you, they have a story for life. Now, the stories of the phantom clowns eventually dissipated, being cast off into the dustbin of urban legend, mass hysteria, or, as they are sometimes called, anomalous phenomena. These were the areas of expertise of one Charles Fort, a writer in the early 20th century who specialized in cataloging and investigating unexplained phenomena. He was basically the Fox Mulder of the early 1900s. Fort had a writing style that infuriated his critics and a journalistic approach that reported phenomena as phenomena. He would not have said that the phantom clowns were real, but he would have reported that the phenomena of their sightings inarguably was. The Charles Fort Institute exists today. Its motto, help us create the world's leading resource for scholarship and research in the understanding of strange experiences and anomalous phenomena. The Charles Fort Institute publishes a magazine in England called the Fortean Times, and they'll mail it to you wherever you live. I subscribe, and I encourage you to do so as well. This is not a commercial, by the way. This is just my personal recommendation. As for the Phantom Clowns, are they gone for good? Here is a story from the Wisconsin State Journal that ran in June of 2000. Fitchburg, Wisconsin police, investigating a man in a clown costume who tried to lure children into the woods on Monday, have concluded that he is not a legitimate clown. Detective Todd Stetzer, who said he's learned a lot about clowning since the man appeared near the King James Court Apartments recently, said the man's black face paint set him apart from any of the mainstream styles of clowning. Which leads us to believe that this man was only using the costume for the purpose of enticement. The story goes on, but let's cut to the chase by finishing it with my favorite sentence. Police have ruled out several clowns who were in the Fitchburg area on legitimate business. Fuck yeah, they were.
Other podcasts reach for the sky. Dana Gould bound. We barely try.
This has been the Dana Gould Hour, brought to you by the Internet. Music by Andy Paley, with Jake Posner behind the board. Produced by Jeff Fox. Graphic design and web production by Spencer Hunt and Segan Friend. Sound editing and post-production by Jalinda Palmer and Joe Napolitano.
Hey, if you like the show, why don't you drop us a line at show@danagould.com. Tom Kenny speaking.
I'm a DJ, I'm a DJ, I'm a person, I'm a person, I'm a singer, I love to sing and DJ. Boom! Peace out. You want me? Peace out. Boom.